Hi everyone, and welcome to the webinar. It's great to have you all here. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes for some people to log on. So I'll just go on mute. But just to say that if anybody has any questions throughout the webinar today, if you just put them in the questions box. So that's not the chat box, that's the questions box. So yeah, we'll just let people log on for the next couple of minutes and then we'll get going. Hi everyone, we're just waiting for a couple more minutes to let people log on. I'm just going to be on mute until we start. So I just mentioned before that if anybody has any questions throughout the session, if you add them into the questions box, and then we'll do our best to cover everything on the session, but then we can always mop up at the Q&A at the end. Okay, so we've got a few more people joining now. So we're going to start in about a minute, just to say that if anybody has any questions, then they use the question box, and that's how we'll be able to answer those. We'll try and do it in the session, but then at the end of the session as well, we've got the Q&A time. So about 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get into it. Okay, great. I think yeah. So, well, I'm sure people will log on as we're going, but I want to make a start on things now. So, so thank you all for joining the webinar. Today we're going to be talking about how you can reduce your cyber risk by empowering your people. And so, let's just get to the next slide. So my name's Dan Jones. I'm head of propositions at Brightwave, and today I'm really pleased to be joined by cybersecurity expert Nick Wilding from our sister company Axlos. Great to have you here, Nick.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. It'd be great if you could start by just giving us a bit of an intro to yourself, please.
Sure. Yeah, I'm the general manager for cyber resilience for Axlos Global Best Practice. Axlos is a joint venture between the UK government and Capita, and we own and nurture global best practice methodologies like ITIL and Prince2, and I run the Resilia cyber resilience best practice portfolio. And essentially that is all about helping organizations, providing them with the training, the insight, the awareness, the confidence to do the right thing, whether you're in the boardroom or on the front line, in the face of ever-growing cyber threats and damaging attacks. My background previous to Axelos, where I've been for over 5 years now, was 11 years at a company called Detica, which is now BA Systems Applied Intelligence, where I helped set up their cybersecurity practice.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for joining us. Okay, so just to talk what we're going to cover today. So the webinar is probably going to run from about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we might have around 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. So we're going to identify the problem and the impact that this can have on your business. We'll discuss the difference between training versus engaging, and how the resilient frontline approach, what that means and what people-centric cybersecurity training is. So I mentioned this at the top end of the webinar, which is that we're going to be using the questions box for any questions, so not chat. If you've got anything to say throughout the session, then pop it into the questions box and we'll do our best to answer that as we go. So before we dive in, I wanted to give a little context. I'm sure that most of you know who Brightwave are, but for those who don't, Brightwave are a digital learning solutions provider. We've been around for over 18 years, creating innovative digital learning solutions for our customers. And throughout that history, we've served the bespoke solutions market. But now we're really pleased to be able to team up with our sister company, Axelos, to deliver world-class, ready-to-go cybersecurity awareness training. Okay, right, so I think I'd like to start here. So EY recently published their CEO Imperative study, where they surveyed over 200 global CEOs and 100 senior investors in global firms. And from this research, CEOs see cybersecurity as the #1 threat to the global economy for the next 5 to 10 years. So it's a huge claim, and I'd like to kind of bring that into something that's a bit more tangible. So Nick, could you explain what the impact of a cyber attack can have on a business, please?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'd like to start with a quote, and it's a quote from the chief exec of Maersk, the world's biggest container shipping organization, who suffered a catastrophic cyber attack back in June 2017. He said, "Most business problems, you will have an intuitive idea on what to do. But with 30 years experience and my skills, I had no intuitive idea on how to move forward." He went public soon after the attack, quite bravely and very honestly, and talked about the emotional journey that he went on when he realized that this attack was so significant for their organization, and conservative estimates suggest that Maersk have lost over £350 million as a result of this attack. The impact was significant. The way in which the attack succeeded was very simple. The point I want to make here is that this is absolutely about impact on your organization, on business. This is not, cybersecurity is not just about IT. And this goes for not just large enterprise organizations like Maersk, it goes for very small organizations as well, and many small organizations, mid-sized organizations who actually supply some of the larger organizations. It's all part of the same ecosystem that the cyber criminals attack. Recent research by the UK's Federation of Small Business, for example, said that small businesses are subjected to almost 10,000 cyber attacks a day in the UK, and that the annual cost of these attacks is estimated to be over £4.5 billion. And as you can appreciate, the impact and individual impact on a small business, and I've spoken to many who have struggled to stay afloat as a result of what was a relatively simple, easy, but highly impactful attack that they suffered.
Okay, so the impact is obvious.
Yeah,
but I want to talk about the problem and how the people are integral to the organization's resilience.
Yeah, so for us, the stark reality is emphasized by that statistic. 90% of all cyber attacks succeed through human error. And the stark reality is that it's down to us, and we have to recognize that our operational resilience to these growing cyber attacks is as much about our own people and their behaviors as it is about technology. It remains remarkably easy for cyber attackers to target our own human vulnerabilities, whether that's clicking on a suspicious link or attachment, sharing personal information on social media that can then be used against us, continuing to rely on poor passwords, accessing sensitive information on insecure public Wi-Fi. The list can go on and on. There was some more research recently that carried out by Telstra, a very large global telecommunications organization, who identified amongst senior security decision makers in organizations around the world, 57% of them highlighted that the biggest threat to their IT security, their system security, was human error. And what I thought I'd put this cartoon up. It's something I use quite regularly in other presentations. For me, it highlights the challenge we face. I usually say, apologise for anybody that might be called Dave, either in the conference hall or on the webinar. So I'm sorry if there is anybody called Dave listening to us at the moment. The reality is people are our strongest defence. They're not our weakest link. We need to ensure that we are actively engaging our people to ensure that they play an integral part in our overall enterprise-wide resilience strategy. Many organisations still believe that technology alone can make you secure, but it does only take one person, like Dave in this cartoon, to allow the cyber criminals to succeed in their mission.
Okay, so I guess we know what businesses want from their employees, but I want to flip that around on its head. So what do employees want from cybersecurity awareness training?
So I think that's a really important question, because all too often we do see organisations delivering, designing awareness training programs that have not actually spoken to the people that they're trying to teach, the learners themselves. It's a bit like communication 101. You really do need to understand your audience in order for that training to succeed. We were very recently involved in some research carried out by one of the UK universities where we delved into this area around people-centric awareness training or people-centered security. And we actually went to ask in a large number of organisations, the learners within those organisations, a whole range of questions. One of them was, so how do you currently feel about cyber awareness training? And you'll see on the slide there that the response was not particularly positive. Part of the research, or the research, was designed to identify some critical do's and don'ts when it comes to what good security awareness training might look like. In terms of don'ts, it was things like, don't rely on very lengthy annual mandated training sessions. You really can't tell your people to do good security. It doesn't work like that. And another one was, don't use overly passive or patronizing delivery. I've seen too many examples of where the solutions that are provided to their people are just overly simplistic and not relevant to the particular jobs that they're doing. And another don't is, don't let that content that you're delivering get tired. You need to keep it refreshed and updated. And that is so particularly relevant when it comes to cybersecurity, where the threats and the vulnerabilities that we face are ever changing. And we need to make sure that our training is kept up to date and refreshed. In terms of the sorts of things you should be doing, is you should really provide a range of innovative content formats. The people we researched, it was clear from them, and we knew this anyway beforehand, was that different people actually do learn in different ways. So we need to give people different formats and different techniques to enable them to choose their preferred style of learning. We should make it personal. And when we talk about personal, and when we spoke to the people on the research, they wanted their organizations to provide them with information about how best they can look after their own or their family's information at home, as well as what they should do well in the workplace. And that there's so much evidence to suggest that good behaviors at home are brought into work as well. Two final quick ones is make sure that you expand on training over time and keep it fresh, and make the learning feel necessary, manageable, and relevant to the people. And this leads on to this other cartoon, and I wonder whether some of you on the call recognize this particular scenario, the idea that you will learn. You will, we will sort of tell you what to do, and you will go away and do it. It doesn't work. UK government research about a year ago identified that nearly 80% of UK organisations, that's all UK organisations, don't actually do any cyber awareness training with their staff. Of those that do, the vast majority still rely on this annual tick box, and we call it tick box tedium, compliance-driven approach. And all it does really is allow an organisation to tick their compliance box. And rather than me telling you, the FCA in the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority, said back in March in one of their papers, one-off security exercises do not guarantee your security.
Okay. So let's talk about training versus engaging, and what that means and how it's actually done.
Sure. So we've put a lot of work into the development of Brasilia Frontline, and we've applied a number of key principles. And one of those, the understanding that we had when we went into it was this expectation that so many people have that behaviour improves if employees know all the facts actually is very flawed. And we see that when it comes to cybersecurity, where many organisations, they have their information security management policies, they send the policies out to people, they ask them to read them, they ask them to validate that they've read them, and that's good, that's a tick in the box. But there are some critical principles that we've applied, and what we've done with Brasilia Frontline is combine two critical things. One is working with subject matter experts. We've identified what those critical, simple, practical bits of advice that we need to be giving, the digital skills that we need to be giving all of our people in response to the range of risks that they have, both at home and in the workplace. And secondly, understanding that, as I've just said, different people learn in different ways. So we need to give them the sort of material that is relevant and targeted at them. So the principles we've applied are: keep it short, use micro-learning to make sure that nothing essentially should take longer than 10 minutes, to ensure that actually there is as great a chance as possible that the individuals will keep that information. Keep it personal, as I've just said. Advise your people how to better protect their own information. Keep it regular, a managed campaign that's adapted and refined over time. Keeping it relevant, making sure that you're aligning training and real life scenarios that you're taking and immersing your learners through, so that they can understand and actually appreciate that this could happen to me, or it has happened to myself already, or a colleague of mine. And finally, this keep it simple, something I feel very passionately about, is that we're trying to educate the normal person in the street that's working for us about something that is can be extremely complex, cybersecurity. And when you mention cybersecurity to any individual, they all often say, that is just too complex, I don't understand it, that's an IT issue. So we really do need to demystify information security, and we've worked really hard with Brasilia Frontline to use plain English and usable practical know-how in communicating the sorts of things that they should be doing.
Can I ask, so how can businesses be sure that the training reflects the threats that are relevant to their businesses, like the here and now?
Sure. So you'll see on the screen here, this is part of the content and the structure to the Brasilia Frontline content portfolio. So we have we now have 5 recommended learning pathways, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but it relates to the question that Dan's just asked. So we know that cybersecurity and the threats are changing on a daily basis, and it is really important that organizations are regularly reviewing the nature of these attacks and how they could be vulnerable to these attacks. And we often find with client organizations that it might be particular teams rather than all your staff that are vulnerable to a particular an attack. One example might be payment diversion fraud, which typically targets people in finance or procurement or accounts payable. So it is important, and it comes back to this keeping it fresh, keeping it alive, and that links back to the risks as well. And we've literally just launched new content that we've developed with Brightwave and added that to our portfolio. So we now have 5 recommended learning pathways. The one that's not on this screen is that we've created some content around manager awareness, but we've now created and added 4 new modules: payment diversion fraud, business email compromise, managing supply chain risks, preparing for a cyber attack, and 4 new refresher videos. These are 1 minute, 2 minutes long, on some of the critical scams that we are seeing increasingly. So there's one on themed phishing, which is going to be particularly relevant at this time of year when we come up to Black Monday and the Christmas period. Ransomware, sextortion, and actually sending information to the wrong person, which is a very common attack. So carrying on with the work that we've done with Brasilia Frontline, another area that we've worked hard at is making sure that it stays relevant and targeted. So really, organizations, you know, they are time poor and they're doing a lot of training anyway, and their staff are employed to do the job that they're employed to do. So we need to minimize the amount of time wasted on training that's not necessarily required. So within Brasilia Frontline, we have training that is specific to particular roles and functions. It's aligned to scenarios that particular areas will see. We've made it responsive, so it's accessible through multiple devices, so people can take the training both in the workplace and at home and on the way to work as well. It's also multilingual as well, if that's of interest. But keeping it relevant and varied is all about making sure that the scenarios, the training scenarios that we use within the training are relevant and based on real life incidents and are real and relatable to. So people, as I've just said, that people can think this could happen to me or has happened to me or a colleague of mine. And it's about engagement, isn't it? It is, and it's about making sure that the training that's delivered has maximum impact with hopefully minimal disruption.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit about this, how you keep it engaging?
Engaging is really interesting, and for me, it's a fantastic opportunity when we're talking about cybersecurity, because it's such a fascinating area, and it's a fascinating area in telling stories, because we have the good guys and the bad guys, and storytelling is so important to our work at Brasilia Frontline. So when we developed the game, we actually went out to people, friends of ours, and said, you know, we want to develop a phishing game, but we want to make it fun. We want to make it innovative and engaging and competitive. So, and this is the result. We created a game whereby the learners are put into the shoes of a would-be cyber criminal, and they're given this cityscape that you see on the screen here. Multiple organizations that you can target and attack with a large number of phishing templates that we've created as well. So you choose your targeted organization, you choose your phishing email, and off you go. You send an attack, and that attack will either succeed or fail depending on, as you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, the relative maturity of that particular organization in terms of their technical maturity, their security maturity. The critical learning piece comes here where, as a result of whether it succeeds or fails, the learner is shown why it's succeeded and why it's failed, and thereby we're teaching them we're showing them the tradecraft that the cyber criminals are using against them on a daily basis. And the critical thing here about the game is that it is competitive. We have 3 levels, and the top level gives you access to sensitive information about, personal information about people at the tops of the organization, the business leaders. So you can carry out then far more destructive and valuable attacks on, they're called whaling attacks or spear phishing attacks on the people running the organization.
Okay, brilliant. And so engaging and keeping it irregular as well. So that's something else you talk about.
Yeah, as I said earlier on, you know, these one-off exercises that so many organizations do continue to rely on just isn't impactful, and actually it's not really successful at changing behaviors, and that's what we're all about. So keeping it regular is a critical thing, and I know, Dan, this is where Brightwave have got a lot of experience with the work that you've done with your own clients. But for us, when it comes to cybersecurity, it is moving from this awareness to advocacy. It comes back to the motoring metaphor I talked about earlier on, which is moving from this sense that I'm having to learn each and every time that I have let's say it's a phishing attack, I'm having to work through and think about everything that I'm doing, to one where it becomes instinctive and habitual, and you just do it, and it's just seen as the way we do things around here. And you see a lot of those sorts of cultures that have been applied in, for example, in the health and safety sector. That's been transformed culturally in many organizations around the world through these sorts of activities, making sure that it is seen as a regular, active campaign, very compelling, very creative. It's a great opportunity. This is all about good marketing as well as just very good practical security advice. And for us, there's some critical elements here, combining both online training, but doing a lot of things offline. This is as much about giving your people the confidence to be able to talk about this. And sadly, I've seen organizations where people are just too scared about putting their hand up and wanting to talk about this because they're worried about the consequences of what might happen as a result. It comes back to something you mentioned earlier, Dan, as well. This regular campaign allows any organization also to take their time to review and adapt and evolve their training, both in response to the changing threats that they're facing, which will be very specific to them, but also gives them an opportunity to talk with their staff. And this is the critical takeaway for me, is to actively engage your people, because they will tell you what works and what doesn't work for them. And essentially, this is, the keeping the regular piece is also just making sure that it's about using refreshers and reminders to reinforce the training that's given.
So I think there's a question that's come up in the questions box, which I think is relevant to this section. So I just want to call that out. So it says, my organization has cybersecurity training and classes, which mandatory each year. They consist of a course, an online course. Most simply click through the slides, trial and error, and then they get a certificate. I feel a real class delivered by a human teacher would achieve more. What's your take on this? So I think that this is kind of speaking to the point of just one shots don't really work.
Absolutely, but also that's an interesting point about that human face of training as well. So Resilia Frontline is online training. However, the assets within Resilia Frontline can be used in multiple ways and be taken offline. So we have supporting PDFs. You can show we've got audio stories, podcasts, we've got all of which can be used in team meetings, company briefings, etc., etc. I do feel that the human face is really important. Now, obviously, the benefit of online is that it's scalable, and you can send it out to all staff. And there may, depending on the size of the organisation, having focusing just on face-to-face training might be restrictive. But again, if it's a small organisation, that can work.
Brilliant, thank you. So, what about people-centric security? So we've talked about this, we've mentioned it a few times throughout the webinar, but I would really like if you could just speak a little bit more to that, please.
Sure. So two big logos on this slide, Royal Holloway University and the National Cybersecurity Centre, part of GCHQ over here in the UK. The NCSC, National Cybersecurity Centre, has recently commissioned Royal Holloway to carry out some new, what I think is pioneering research around people-centered security. And Royal Holloway has contacted Resilia to be their chosen partner in carrying out this work, which we're delighted to be doing. The NCSC recently said, security that doesn't work for people doesn't work. And I love that, because it just highlights the importance that people have. Security teams often have relied on making sure that they see themselves as quite rightly, as the people that are responsible and accountable for security within their organisations. But all too often they don't understand the ways in which they can actively engage with their people, and that's where tools like Resilia Frontline, that's where approaches like people-centered technology can work. Somebody that I was speaking to the other day said, I want to make sure that security is working in my business and takes into account the real ways people work. I don't want security getting in the way of my team doing their jobs well. And that's a very common comment from organizations that we work with is that they want to make sure that their security awareness training goes hand in hand with their day-to-day operations, that it isn't something that interrupts that unnecessarily for long periods of time. So this research, which is literally just kicking off now, is being designed to help organizations and identify how they can start developing that positive security culture within their organization. And that does come from the bottom up. It does and will start and can only start with your people and talking with your people. And we know that it's important to have ongoing dialogues and discussions with your people that actually taps into their ways of working, thrashes out difficult processes, pressure points. There's always going to be rules and regulations that's not up for debate, but we do know that people often use workarounds. They don't comply with company policies, security policies. Why is that? What are the barriers to that? And that's what that research is designed to do. And we're just working together with Royal Holloway and the NCSC to develop a workshop template, which we want to take round to organizations that will bring learners, people, employees round a table to actually start asking some of these questions that we can then take back to the relevant security practitioners in those organizations to develop more effective engaging awareness. So if you do want to know more about that, please do let us know after the webinar.
Brilliant. Get some very positive comments via the questions around gaming-based teachings and how effective they are, which is fantastic. So I guess the biggest takeaway today is that it's all about behaviour change. And so, Nick, it would be brilliant if we could just wrap up before we go into the Q&A.
Sure.
Just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and at the risk of repeating myself, this is just really a summary slide. And just to reiterate and hopefully give you some critical takeaways. So when you're doing security awareness training, everything that I've learned, both in my time at Detica and now at Axelos, there's some key rules, key guidelines. So make sure that your people access short, targeted and immersive training. Annual, long, boring exercises will not work. And very much that taking a compliance approach is deadly. Your people, you need to make sure that your people are gaining confidence through taking the training that you're providing, and you give them the opportunity to share the lessons learned. This is about confidence. This is about talking with colleagues, talking with your managers, and also there's a role for the business leaders as well, and making sure that the people running these organizations are taking time out to make sure that they're communicating to all of their staff just how important they see information security for their organization. Their people will learn to help adapt and refresh content, measure that engagement. That's absolutely critical. So there's benchmarks you can do before and after so that you can track and make sure that behavior change is working. And then to repeat something I mentioned earlier, the power of storytelling. And I really do feel that the stories are so important, and you'll see that in the scenarios in the training that we provide. And an example of that in Resilia is that through my own experiences in working with chief execs and board directors in a number of organizations when I was at Detica, taught me that these guys love stories, narrative, anecdotes. So when I started at Axelos, I thought, would it be good to create and write a book, a thriller? So I was introduced to a guy called Jerome Vincent, and I gave him the context of an attack on a chief exec of what's turned out to be a mid-sized organization. And it tells the emotional journey of this guy called Jim Baines, who's the chief exec of Baines Packaging. And the book tells the emotional journey he goes on when he realizes that he was the target and victim of a cyber attack. And it's not just him that's the target, it's what the attackers are really trying to get to are his big customers, who are pharmaceutical companies and FMCG companies. The feedback we've had to this book, because it's just a different approach to engaging critically business leaders and executive management teams and managers, but it can be read by anyone. There's no technology in here. The feedback has been fantastic, and just one example there from Richard, who was the former corporate security director at Vodafone. The feedback's been fantastic, and it's just reiterated the importance of stories. And every time we bring this book out and we give it away, the feedback's been great. If any of you would like a free copy of the book, again, please do contact us after the webinar. We'd be delighted to send it on to you.
Brilliant, thanks, Nick. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Yes, okay, let me just jump into the questions. I've just been trying to keep a track of them as they've been coming through. So, okay, there's one here. So it says, do you believe that tests and certificates following up are a good way to motivate or participate or to measure the success of the sessions?
I do think tests and sort of knowledge tests, both within the training and at the end of the training, is really important. Yeah. Certificates, I'm less taken on, to be perfectly honest. I think, and the critical thing to remember about security is that you can be secure one day and totally insecure the next day. This is all about behaviours. It's all about making sure that you're vigilant and resilient every single day. And the danger of taking a compliance-based approach is that you might think you're compliant one day, and the sad truth is that you might be hit by a completely new attack or just a very simple attack the next day, because someone doesn't do something that they're supposed to do. So ongoing tests and refreshers and reminders, I think, are absolutely essential. I'm less excited about certificates, but in some organisations that will work, and with some people they would like certificates. Yeah. Because
can you speak to how Resilient Frontlines works in terms of the testing? Because you mentioned it at the beginning and at the end.
So we've got a diagnostics test. So we allow anybody within the organisation, and this is ultimately down to the client organisation. And they can use this in any which way they want, and they can turn off the functionality if they wish. But we have a facility whereby any individual learner who, if asked to take, let's say it's phishing training, thinks that they know all about phishing training and why am I having to take this, instead of taking the learning and the training, just does a very quick, simple test. And if they pass that test to the prescribed pass mark, again set by the client organisation, they're not forced to take the training. And again, this is all about us trying to help our organisations, client organisations, deliver training where it's needed most, and making sure that they're using our training to identify critical training needs throughout the organisation through that tool. The training also, all the training also has tests at the end to make sure, and it's all logged, and you can actually track and measure that in any which way.
Okay, brilliant. This is a good question. So how often does someone need to be updated on training?
That's a very, very good question. I'm not sure there's a simple and a right answer to that. I think you need to make sure that within individuals or within teams, that you just keep those lines of communication open, and again, they will typically tell you where they think that they need some more training. The simple answer is that you just, when it comes to cyber, it's a risk like no other risk. It is constantly changing. I would suggest that when we come back to the regularity of the training that's given, we really should be aiming for a campaign that's very active every single month. So there might be sort of within a month, there might be a few days where there is some training that's sent out. But it is that all pervasive, and it is all that sort of so destructive if an attack can succeed, that you do need to consider active ways in which you can keep all of your people up to date on a regular basis. But individuals, that's a tough question. And
I guess that links back to the regular, so the timeline that we saw, keeping it regular. And there's elements within the Resilient Frontline training, so the animations and the videos, those could be used as learning nuggets.
Absolutely, absolutely. All the training we have can be used. You know, so we have podcasts and audio stories that can be listened to by teams. We have a whole range of different assets, training assets that can be used in a whole host of different ways, not just online.
Okay, brilliant. So here's a good question. So how do you measure the outcomes of behaviour change? So I can jump in. So I know from my own experience working with global organisations, so when we are talking about cybersecurity risks, there's something that are tangible. So it's all about benchmarking where you are as an organization before the training intervention is implemented, and then being able to follow up with those regular benchmarks thereafter. And these things are tangible. So they are phishing attacks.
Sure.
They are laptops that are lost. It could be all sorts of different things, but they have a number that you can assign to that, and so you can actually measure against the training took place on X date, and here are numbers of how many phishing attacks have got through. And I think that's how I would say that you could measure the outcomes.
Yeah, and there is another one with phishing, which is actually before an attack happens, which is when effective phishing training should see a complete spike in the reporting of phishing emails, because the guidance and advice that we give in phishing is, if you think it's suspicious, it probably is, and make sure that it's reported. So many organizations carry out ethical phishing tests and are surprised and shocked at the number of people that actually open up the attachments. They then need to do the training. So many organizations do those ethical phishing tests, then do the training, then do that test again. And that's another way of measuring, hopefully, a reduction. One example is that we work with a global insurance company who have used Resilient Frontline training as part of their cyber insurance policies to small businesses. And they've seen, since launch last year, they've seen a 75% reduction in claims, and there's been no phishing claims. And again, that's just an evidence of the success of what good training can provide. The other thing I would say is that there is also a qualitative approach to this, and a couple of the clients I work with are also, and it again comes back to people-centered security. They just get a little bit frustrated with statistics, because statistics at the end of the day can be used to prove anything. Their view is that it's all about qualitative research. So they actively have a campaign of talking to their staff, asking what's different, why are you now treating particular threats in different ways as a result of the training we've given. So it's that qualitative feedback that they feel is as important as some of these critical sort of quantitative KPIs.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So we are coming up to, so 40 minutes in, so I'm gonna bring this to a close. Thank you so much, Nick. I really appreciate that. Okay, so I hope you found the webinar useful today. We are really excited to team up with our sister company to deliver people-centric cybersecurity training. And actually, Resilient Frontline plays a part in our bigger product offering, which we're going to be launching next year. So the solution is ready to go, and it can be implemented into your systems pretty much instantly, right?
Yep.
So no matter where you are on the cybersecurity strategy, we'd love to talk with you. So if you'd like to learn more about what we've talked about today, then you can get in touch via the website, or you can give us a call, or we have on the Resilient People-Centric Cybersecurity landing page, which you can get some more information about what we've talked about today. So thank you, Nick. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks everyone for listening. I hope that was useful for you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.